So again, taking off with the right tool. It's kind of cool being a part of the UAS industry when things started back in early 2010 or so, when there was just one or two manufacturers. Now we've got split up between who builds the platform and who builds the sensor. So glad everybody's here because I'm gonna try to throw out different options from hardware to software, lessons learned, and then kind of if you've got an unlimited budget and can buy that golden tool, which doesn't exist, buy a bunch of things. So anyways, Cinco de Mayo. All right, so congratulations, we made it. So let's do this little fiesta, and then later on tonight, you can do your little siesta. All right, so the drawing board's where I always start out with our teams prior to any job coming online, whether it's a client coming to us asking about, hey, can you do this job? They don't know what type of technology we have. It's up to us to choose which tool in our toolbox is applicable, whether it's LiDAR, photogrammetry, a combination of both, or they just need some simple oblique photos or a quadcopter go out on site. So during that process, we always ask the client or determine internally, is this going to be a PLS sign and sealed product? Do we have to ensure that there is going to be proper licensure in that state involved with the product or ground control? Or is this just a preliminary 10% design idea that you can get by with just applying control, but not having to have a full-blown boundary survey, topographic survey, creek delineation, whole 9 yards. So we do try to make clients and internal engineers aware that there are different levels of effort, which also return in what sensor or drone will you be flying on site to give you that quality of product. So the golden tool, I'd love to have a pipe wrench that was golden because, man, that'd be sweet. But anyways, things I found throughout this industry is that it's best to start out with a high quality platform because usually in the end of a job, someone's going to ask you for additional product out of that sensor or data that you didn't know they were going to ask for. And you're going to say, well, we didn't put out ground control, or there might be that bowl effect happening with a point cloud if you're using a lower quality sensor. So PPK platforms or post-processing kinematic are fantastic in the imagery and LiDAR world, because if you have a static base on site, or in North Carolina, you can download CORS stations within 10 kilometers of your data, you're able to post-process the image locations that were acquired with that drone or that LiDAR data to the centimeter level accuracy. So although you might have been providing a mosaic, so a non-georeferenced image, or a super high resolution orthophoto, that PPK ability, which usually takes you from your hobbyist level drone to your prosumer grade drone, is where I really recommend just starting out with. Usually price points around, $5,000–6,000 to way above that, but we found great success using PPK. RTK is even great too, a real-time kinematic if you've got a VRS network in North Carolina. So it also gives you kind of multiple perspectives to think of although they might just want, for say, a DJI Phantom, how about we take it to the next level to make sure that quality of product is built how it should be. GCPs are necessary, in my opinion, no matter what product you do, to vouch the accuracy. We have some things called arrow points, which I realize I forgot to bring, but DOT uses them as well. So that means, hey, they're pretty good. They're yellow and gray panels that you set out. They're their own GPS. You just mash a button, they collect static data. Not a salesman for them, but if you're not familiar with GPS equipment, you just kind of want to have a couple checks on site. I think they are very valuable because they just allow you to have that little bit of good feeling that, hey, the data came in where it should be, versus just providing a deliverable to somebody and having no idea if it's 10 feet accurate or 500 feet wrong in the vertical direction.
Please stay towards the podium.
Yeah, I'll repeat that. Yeah, so one thing about the arrow panels is they are a styrofoam hard square that you set on the ground. There is a template they can provide you that will allow you to set it on top of like a 6-inch nail in the ground. Typically, we use those arrow points as a toss it out, collect data, pull it up. You cannot come back to that point again because it's not a survey control point, more so a quality check. So there is one extra step you can do to put it on a known point that you can come back to. But I will say aligning a 2-foot by 2-foot panel that does not have a hole through the middle of it exactly on a nail to the centimeter level accuracy is not what I would recommend, but it's better than nothing. And it allows your pilots to not have to have full survey knowledge about VRS, RTK, what is PPK, different terminology. So, it's kind of a way to stair step your approach or build your program. So there's always a fail safe if the GPS didn't work or you were out of state and you don't have a VRS license. So That answer it for you? Sweet. And I apologize, I didn't have a photo of them because I was supposed to bring them, but we'll have to connect later, give you a reason to call me. Photogrammetry workflows. Starting out, I kind of began my world of remote sensing and structure for motion with Agisoft, walked into some online programs, learned Pix4D Mapper. Over the past year, I've learned the phenomenal awesomeness of Pix4D Matic, in my opinion. I was a diehard Pix4D Mapper user. I tested Pix4D Matic and I was like, I just don't like the workflow of it. I don't think it's holding my ground control points down, and kind of ended up pushing myself into a corner and saying, hey, let me learn this Pix4D Matic because I've seen some phenomenal things. And the biggest point that I would say about structure for motion processing is you've got your standard work laptop, which might be a CAD processor, maybe 16, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and maybe a terabyte of storage. So you usually don't have much to work with unless you've got resources of screaming gaming computers with unlimited cores. You know, that is phenomenal. But Pix4D Matic actually does utilize your standard laptop's resources to the nth degree that I've been really impressed with. I've pushed about, I think, 4,600 images from a Wingtra 42 megapixel camera onto my standard Dell laptop. I think it's got 64 gigabyte of RAM, terabyte of storage. And it was able to process that data throughout different steps over a period of a day and a half, which 4,600 images of 42 megapixels on a day and a half on a laptop is crazy. I actually ran that same job through Pix4D Mapper desktop on a Screaming Tower. The products came in within a 10th horizontal of each other, which is about what I say error with your structure for motion horizontal. So to me, that was kind of a game changer because you can allow your pilots to do some processing in the field or out of town and not have to worry about pushing massive amounts of data up via a Wi-Fi hotspot before they leave a job because you're concerned, did we get correct overlap or not? And then we walked into using a phase 1 camera, which I'd love to show you guys about. It captures 100 megapixel imagery, which each photo is around 130 megabytes a piece. So you're talking about terabytes of data if you fly a job, and the post-processing ortho mosaic as a TIFF format can be just ungodly huge because of the clarity of that sensor. And Pix4D Matic has really been able to crunch that data, in my opinion, much better than other softwares have. So again, I don't sell any of this stuff. This is just previous experience. I love the ability of that software. Have also gotten access to ArcGIS's site scan online. We do use that for some post-processing of data. It does not, to my ability, allow you to add EXIF data for PPK processing. So it's more of a churn and burn for your hobbyist level drone or just a quick map from your DJI EXIF photos that you basically drag and drop. So any comments on structure for motion? Point me wrong, point me right. Anybody use Pix4D Matic? Yeah, 1, 2, cool. Well, if you have Pix4D Mapper or Survey, you might actually have access to that software through a bundle option or just download it for free. I'd recommend it. It's pretty powerful. And then the next conversation that kind of walks into that is grid versus ground. So as a surveyor, we always work on, grid coordinates or ground coordinates, or if you're on a job that covers a few miles in length. When you're using conventional surveyors that use total stations, you've got to translate that data back to ground. Now, how do we work with UAS imagery that's collecting in grid? Well, we do the same thing that we do with our survey data. We scale it to ground. And we've actually had a really good success of scaling the image locations from PPK drones to ground, processing it, and then your ortho image that is created is actually generated in ground, so it matches your control points already. As a default, I usually like to run the same site fully in grid, and that allows you to kind of compare the two products. Does everybody know the difference of grid or ground? Have they heard that? I might have just jumped right over someone's head. All right, cool. Anyways, we'll say the world's not flat and sometimes images are flat, so you got to correct for it. Very wrong way. Kind of sound like a description of Nerf by Matt. Just kidding. I'm glad you opened the door on that one because Nerf is actually phenomenal. I don't know what it stands for either, so don't ask. But it does have a future of that structure for motion world that we should realize. So I'll go into a quick project example of a site we flew with the Wingtra. I think that platform itself is phenomenal. So just kind of wanted to walk you through the flight planning process, the quality of product created, and then some of the things that system doesn't do great that others might do even better. So this is a screen capture of the Wingtra pilot planning software. So I like showing this before we do flight demos, so you actually can kind of get an idea of what goes on. It's very basic and simple. It uses a tablet as a controller. There are not any joysticks, which is kind of crazy to wrap your head around. You can create this flight plan on your desktop computer ahead of time, or you can actually upload it to the tablet afterwards or draw it on the tablet. You import KMLs, just use your finger to create the boundaries of the site, define your overlap, rotate your flight lines. We always require our pilots to make flight plans prior to arriving on site. Typically, you get out there, you open the door and someone walks up to you and then you're distracted the whole time. So having those flight plans created prior to the job, even if they're only a 5-minute flight, you say, do it before you arrive in the truck, pull off at a gas station. So it's just you focusing on everything you do. Because the input parameters you select on these flight plans with automated drones, it's going to listen to exactly what you tell it to. And if you tell it to fly into a wall, it might so do that. Probably not Census because it's pretty smart, but the Wingtra doesn't have sensors on it, so it'll listen to the pilot. Has anybody used the Wingtra before or have a system familiar with the platform? Awesome. So here we've basically got, this site was about 800 acres, I believe. I prefer to make a flight plan that covers the entire site. You put your home location where you're going to initially start at. The aircraft will fly for about 50 minutes, come back to the home location, turn it off, pack it up, drive to their next launch recovery area where you can see the next half of the job. Put the batteries back in there, the drone will take off and reconnect right where it stopped. The Wingtra is nice because it's orange, it's very bright. You can easily see that system 4,000, 5,000 feet away with a single pilot observer system. We've actually daisy chained with 3 different VOs and pushed that system out about 10,000 feet from the pilot. And that was in an area where there was no humans. It was a desert. So that's why we tested it on that railroad site. But the Wingtra did perform phenomenally with keeping connection, telling us battery life. And to me, that was kind of a success story of how reliable that system is. Yep, that was about 4 flights. So we judge about 200 acres of flight. You can push it to be further, but I like to basically take your side lap and bump it to 80%. I prefer to overkill imagery, and that's on one of my bullet points of the slides, because you can't ever go back to a job. Certain areas of this job where you can see on the outer limits, you'll see where the point cloud kind of goes black and disappears, or the ortho image gets blurry. That's because your overlap wasn't as high, whereas at the end of the job. So here I'm just kind of zooming around the ortho, showing the quality of it. I think Wingtra is actually releasing either a 64 or a 100 megapixel camera to go on their platforms this year. So that'll be pretty awesome to kind of actually have a higher quality sensor than the one they have. And lastly, this is a point cloud visual. And you can kind of see in the areas of thick vegetation, there's that black hole on the right side of the screen. So that's where I do like to refer to when you're flying jobs. Our goal here was to map a solar farm for an Alta update. But if we were trying to map vegetation heights with photogrammetry, having a higher altitude or a larger focal length of the camera or field of view would greatly increase your ability to stitch trees. Typically, the nicer lens you get, the narrower field of view, or the narrower that image is being acquired, the more photos and overlap you're going to have to take. One thing how I love about the DJI Phantom 4 is it has like an 84-degree field of view. So it has more of a fisheye view, but it stitches stuff together phenomenally because it has so many tie points on the sides of that image versus having a really narrow field of view and having to acquire tighter flight lines. And here you got some water, so it has its little void as well with photogrammetry. So that kind of walks us into, well, photogrammetry is not your tool because you're trying to map the ground under trees, and all we're getting here is tops of trees and some top of microstesium. We want to see where the dirt is at. What other sensor can we use? Well, that's the next slide. Got one in the middle. So we've got the ability with the Wingtra to actually take out the camera and replace it with a different lens. So we actually have the oblique sensor, which I'll show you guys afterwards. It sits in the belly of the aircraft. You take the sensor out. This oblique sensor has more of a fisheye rounded lens, lower quality camera. So you have to fly at basically an altitude of 150 to 200 feet to acquire really clear photos, in my opinion. But it does allow you to see the facades of buildings And if you're trying to use photogrammetry to map doorstep elevations or see underneath awnings, since this camera actually sees a tilt when it's flying on a fixed wing, you can stitch together things that the nadir camera would not be able to see. SUE paint, or SUE designation for subsurface utility engineering, the guys on the side of the roads painting lines like 811. We utilize drones to map that paint in order to keep our surveyors out of harm's way. You have to walk through a road to designate the utility, but if we can keep a surveyor from coming behind them to shoot those marks with an instrument, how about we use a drone, and that way we're keeping 50% of harm out of the way. That fisheye lens with that oblique tilt does allow us to see underneath the pine canopy or oak canopy that's on your 2-lane roads. So again, it's giving us that PPK high quality data set that we can rely upon from the wing truck. And we've even switched sensors out in the field because we wanted a high resolution, clean top-down nadir view, and then the oblique cameras to fly at a lower altitude. So again, there are so many tools. I hate to say it, you know, it's really cool to be able to have multiple sensors on different aircrafts. And speaking of which, this little video is me kind of showing you how I put the phase 1 IXM 100 megapixel camera. So we started flying this about a month and a half ago, and this camera is truly revolutionary in my opinion. 100 megapixel clarity will allow you to see an ant on the ground at 75 feet, and at 50 feet, you can tell if it's a spider or an ant. And to me, that is just absolutely crazy. It is overkill for a lot of jobs, but WSP has a large bridge inspection team. And we utilize smaller drones to map cracks, but this IXM camera, since it's a true metric, acquires imagery that is very reliable and accurate down to map 1 or 2 millimeter cracks without having to have a human walking on a roadway or shut down traffic lanes or have the bucket trucks that actually hang the guys off the side. So using drones is making us have a safer approach to jobs, and it allows for you to have that insurance documentation, which we all like, of that photo of the site. So you can actually talk to your employees and say, hey, why did you grade that this way? And then you can actually pull an image up and look at it. Does anybody here have access or flown a phase 1 camera before? Cool. Feel free to stop by and see it. It's heavy. To me, it's shocking the quality that the M300 can carry. I think it's probably a 6-pound camera. Flight time's around 18 minutes. Phase 1 did a great job of allowing that scanner or that camera to be placed on an M300, but they're also partnering with other American-made firms. I hate to say it, I like DJI's products. They fly really well. They do obstacle avoidance. They're easy to teach pilots. So our methodology is purchase third-party sensors, put them on drones that are easy to teach people how to fly. And then once there are blue listed quadcopters or hexacopters, American-made, we'll acquire those systems and put the sensors on top of them. So the sensors don't always have to be from a name brand like DJI. You can go somewhere else and put them on their platform. And this is a photo I could have told you about. So this is basically at 75 feet, and this is in my driveway, and that little pebble on the right is like a fragment of asphalt that comes out that my little 2-year-old likes to throw at me and I step on in the house when he carries them inside. So it's just kind of like crazy to actually see, and this is actually degraded quality, you know, how detailed photogrammetry from drones can be, and that we're actually feeding this into AI software for it to do automated crack detection just with this data. But again, it always goes back to what sensor are you using? Is it reliable? Does that focal length actually have the measurement down to the micron that needs to be put into Pix4D or Pix4D-Matic? So those little things matter. And a few more slides here. So LiDAR, I'm not going to talk too detailed on, but I will say over the past 2-3 years, there have been other companies besides Regal adding into the LiDAR world. We have an L1 sensor, which coming from a Regal background, I was like, man, I'll be honest with you guys, I think that's junk. Started flying it, learned it, and it's kind of like you can turn a medium grade sensor into a high quality product with the correct post-processing softwares and strip alignment. So that walks into, say, for example, if you're using a Regal scanner, you can go out, fly site, very minimal post-processing, have something within 10th or 1500ths vertical at any surface correct. Lower quality or medium grade LiDAR sensors like the LiveUX or the Velodyne Puck, they collect a lot of data, maybe not always the best penetration through vegetation, but they're putting a lot of points out at once. sometimes that leads to what we call a stair step. So each flight line, your data may not be correlating within the right, say, few tenths of a foot. I like to bring data from the L1 into TerraSolid, do some post-processing with strip alignment, then bring it into, say, Topodot or Cyclone 3DR, QC that, and then alter flight lines again from there, or do adjustments with translation or scaling data. So it's not a fly data with these lower grade quality sensors. Run it through one software, kick it out, run contours, and you're done for high quality data. It's more of a take your time, make sure the right user is looking at that data who has an experience with working with LiDAR sensors and strip adjustment. And then through that process of using actually low grade to medium grade LiDAR sensors, it can help you learn how to post-process high quality data to actually get to the hundreds elevation data correct from Regal scanners in just a tenth. So to me, it's kind of neat to use the different LiveUp scanners, learn what they do great, what they do lack on, but not everybody can spend $100,000 to $400,000 on a LiDAR scanner. So what are options that are in the $50,000 range? And that's the LiveUp scanner, Rock Robotics, you've heard of them, Phoenix USA, LiDAR USA. They all have platforms that are around that $50,000, which might meet your 2-foot tolerances or 1-foot tolerances. So not every product has to be, extremely Nat's ass tight tolerance. I like it that way, but there's not always budgets for it. So again, there's so many tools in a toolbox, it is hard to narrow it down. If I could recommend anything, I say the Wingtra is a phenomenal platform. It's reliable. And then additionally with that, we have a legacy EB, and it is kind of cool to see where that light styrofoam platform has made its niche into a platform that on sites where you might have a lot of people or moving traffic, it does actually meet the weight standards to fly over people with the Pacific waiver. Whereas the Census or Wingtra has such a heavy weight, it doesn't fall into that styrofoam low impact collision weight range. So again, I wish there was one platform and one software where it's like, here's your answer. But in reality, it's just a bunch of R&D and then talking to people. So yeah, have any questions? Awesome. Well, appreciate your time and look forward to catching up with you. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you please repeat the question with the microphone?
Yeah. So Matt asked about the difference of the Wingtra versus the EB and the quality of the cameras. So the EB has a SOTA camera. I think it's a 20-ish megapixel, a very small lens. I think it's a 1-inch sensor, whereas the Wingtra has your actual Sony camera. And I like to use sensors that have an actual mapping grade camera in it for the quality of point clouds that are created. But what I have found neat with the SenseFly is it has RTK ability, whereas the Wingtra does not. So if, for instance, you don't have a base station or you can't manage to ship a box that's 5 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide, EB's wings pop off and fold into a narrow box. So although the quality of the product means you have to fly at a lower altitude and more overlap, you can still get a decent product with RTK. But if you don't have RTK, then you're kind of back falling into PPK, which I'd say use the Wingtra. But the VTOL of the Wingtra is the best part, which everybody knows. Same thing about the Census. That safety aspect of that launch and landing and possibly hitting a power line or a tree, unless you're in Texas or somewhere where there's vast plains, I'd recommend VTOL. But since WSP does have a large footprint, we do have the ability to use different platforms in different areas. I think the new EB or Ag Eagle, it's about $11,000 total package, which is great in my opinion for a fixed wing, whereas the Wingtra is going to push you around low 30s. So you do have to weigh in cost for a lot of these things and then who's flying it. So yeah. Cool. Thank y'all very much.